What if the very things that have made you feel broken your entire life were never signs of disorder at all? What if they were simply the misunderstood brilliance of your wiring? For so many INTPs, this is not just a question, it's a quiet ache they've carried since childhood. The racing thoughts, the restless mind, the obsession with clarity, the frustration with meaningless routines, all of it often gets labeled ADHD, OCD, or worse, lazy, unmotivated, flawed. And the labels don't just sting, they shape the way you see yourself. This is where the confusion begins. Because on the surface, INTP behaviors can look strikingly similar to ADHD or OCD. The restlessness feels like hyperactivity. The endless mental loops look like compulsions. And so the mind begins to whisper, maybe I'm not just different, maybe I'm broken. But here's the real controversy: what if this correlation isn't what it seems? What if much of what looks like disorder is actually the natural, complex design of an INTP brain, wired for depth, precision, and exploration in ways the world often misunderstands? The silent struggles since childhood. From the very beginning, many INTPs feel like outsiders in their own lives. While other children seem to effortlessly blend into group games, shared routines, and social chatter, the INTP child quietly watches from the side, thinking, observing, analyzing. They're not disinterested in people, they're simply wired to find meaning, and so much of what others call connection feels shallow and forced. Small talk becomes exhausting. Repetition feels pointless. Group activities that others enjoy feel like a slow suffocation. And because no one explains why their mind works this way, the INTP child grows up carrying an invisible question: why can't I be like them? Why do the things that bring others joy feel so meaningless to me? Over time, this difference hardens into self-doubt. What begins as mild discomfort evolves into a deeper belief: maybe I'm flawed. Maybe something is wrong with me. And that thought, planted in childhood, becomes the seed of shame that many INTPs still carry well into adulthood. This is the hidden struggle of the INTP, not just feeling different, but being taught by the world to see that difference as a defect. And when you're young, without the language of psychology, without understanding personality wiring, it's easy to mistake a unique design for a broken one. Inside the INTP mind, cognitive wiring. To really understand why INTPs are so often misunderstood, you have to step inside the mechanics of their mind. At the core of the INTP brain are two forces constantly at play: T, introverted thinking, and N, extrovert intuition. T demands precision. It analyzes, dissects, questions everything until it makes sense. It hates vague answers, surface-level explanations, and sloppy logic. N, on the other hand, is restless curiosity. It branches out endlessly, pulling in possibilities, ideas, patterns, and connections that others don't even see. Now imagine these two running together. One function digging deeper, the other scattering wider. What does that create? A mind that is always on, always analyzing, always connecting, always restless. For an INTP, silence isn't the absence of thought, it's the explosion of 10 more thoughts waiting to be unraveled. And here's where the misunderstanding happens. This wiring produces traits that, on the surface, look like disorder. The endless analysis feels like overthinking. The curiosity feels like restlessness. The T demand for clarity turns into perfectionism. To an outsider, or even to the INTP themselves, this can look suspiciously like ADHD or OCD. But here's the truth: these are not pathologies. They are natural outcomes of a brain wired for depth and exploration. The problem isn't the design, it's the lens through which the design is judged. The ADHD correlation. Now let's talk about the correlation people often make between INTPs and ADHD. ADHD, at its core, is not about curiosity or intellect. It's about neurological regulation. The brain struggles to manage attention consistently, regardless of interest. It's a chemical and regulatory issue. A person with ADHD doesn't just lose interest, their brain literally pulls them away, no matter how much they want to stay. INTPs, however, live in a different reality. Their so-called distractibility comes from a very different engine, T plus NE. When something sparks their curiosity, they can enter deep, almost obsessive focus, hours disappear. But when the subject feels mundane, repetitive, or shallow, the mind refuses to cooperate. Not because it can't regulate attention, but because it feels starved of meaning. On the outside, both look similar, jumping from idea to idea, struggling with routines, zoning out during boring tasks. But the origin is different. One is a neurological imbalance, the other is a selective hunger for depth. Here's the painful part, many INTPs don't know this distinction. They grow up hearing, "Why can't you just focus? Why can't you be like everyone else?" And slowly, they start to wear labels that don't belong to them. Maybe I have ADHD. Maybe I'm broken. The shame begins to settle in. But what if it was never a disorder? What if it was the mind's natural refusal to settle for shallow waters? INTPs aren't incapable of focus. They're capable of intense, surgical focus, but only when the subject lights up their curiosity. The OCD correlation. Now let's look at the other common comparison, INTPs and OCD. Clinically, OCD is defined by two key parts, intrusive thoughts and compulsions. The mind throws terrifying or irrational thoughts. What if I hurt someone? What if I left the stove on? And the person feels an uncontrollable urge to perform rituals or repetitive behaviors to neutralize the anxiety. The cycle is not curiosity, it's survival. It's fear-driven. For INTPs, the picture looks different. They don't spiral because of terror. They spiral because of clarity-seeking. T plus N pushes them into loops, analyzing every possibility, questioning every angle, rechecking to make sure their logic is airtight. On the outside, it can look like compulsive overthinking, even perfectionism. But the motive is not to quiet fear. It's to reach understanding. This is where the confusion arises. An observer might see an INTP rewriting the same paragraph 10 times, revisiting the same problem for weeks, or obsessively trying to get it right and think, is this OCD? But the inner world is fundamentally different. OCD loops are a prison of anxiety. INTP loops are an endless workshop of ideas. One suffocates, the other creates, though admittedly, it can still exhaust the INTP. Here's the real psychological cost: many INTPs misinterpret their loops as disorder. They think, why can't I stop? Why do I push for impossible perfection? That identity confusion builds shame. They start to believe their very mind is defective, when in truth, it's just operating in a unique, depth-driven rhythm. And once you see this difference, the weight begins to lift. You realize, this isn't pathology. This is wiring. The same wiring that exhausts you also gives you the capacity for extraordinary insight, creativity, and problem-solving. The real psychological cost. Here's the hidden truth most INTPs never get to say out loud: the real suffering isn't in their mind being fast, restless, or analytical. The real suffering begins when society, and eventually they themselves, mislabel that mind. From childhood, every difference gets noticed. When they drift away in thought during a classroom lecture, it's called distracted. When they avoid small talk and prefer their inner world, it's called antisocial. When they question rules and routines, it's called defiance. None of these labels are accurate, but a child doesn't know that. A child absorbs them like facts. And once those labels sink in, they start shaping identity. An INTP may grow into adulthood silently repeating the same accusations they once heard: I'm lazy. I'm unfocused. Something's wrong with me. This self-narrative becomes the background noise of their entire existence. Even their strengths, creativity, innovation, insight, get shadowed by the belief that they're somehow defective. The emotional toll of this is profound. It's not just insecurity, it's a deep fatigue. Imagine living inside a mind that never stops spinning, and then adding a voice that constantly says, "You shouldn't be this way." That combination doesn't just cause doubt, it causes emotional exhaustion. It turns every attempt at self-discovery into self-criticism. And here lies the cruel irony: the traits that make INTPs question themselves the most, restlessness, overanalysis, perfectionism, are the very traits that fuel their brilliance. But because they're misunderstood, INTPs grow up fighting the very parts of themselves that could have been their strength. They end up wearing masks, suppressing their natural wiring, trying to fix something that was never broken. That's the deepest psychological cost, not the restless thoughts, not the spirals, not even the perfectionism. The real cost is shame. Shame convinces an INTP that their uniqueness is a flaw. Shame makes them mistrust their own mind. And once shame settles in, it quietly erodes confidence, creativity, and even the will to explore. This is why so many INTPs feel emotionally heavy, not because their wiring is wrong, but because carrying the burden of false disorder identities is crushing. They're not broken. They've just been misunderstood for so long that they start misunderstanding themselves. Before anything else, it needs to be said clearly, ADHD and OCD are very real conditions. They deserve compassion, attention, and treatment when they truly exist. This is not about dismissing them. It's about untangling what belongs to disorder from what belongs to personality, because confusion between the two has cost many INTPs their peace of mind. Here's the shift: personality traits are not illnesses. An INTP who gets lost in thought, who feels restless in routines, who perfects ideas until they shine, this is not brokenness. This is wiring. The T-NA system is designed for depth, complexity, and exploration. It's not a malfunction, it's a blueprint. And when that blueprint is misunderstood, it feels like chaos. But when you finally see it for what it is, the same wiring transforms into clarity. Restlessness stops being distraction and becomes curiosity. Thought spirals stop being compulsions and become refinement. Perfectionism stops being paralysis and becomes precision. The frame you use changes the meaning, and the meaning changes the experience. This is where healing begins, in realizing you're not defective, you're different. And different has value. You weren't meant to thrive in every shallow conversation or every rigid routine, you were meant to thrive in depth, in innovation, in uncovering truths that others overlook. That's not a weakness, it's a gift. The moment you understand this, a weight lifts. Instead of fighting your mind, you start working with it. Instead of wasting energy asking, "What's wrong with me?" you start asking, "How can I use this mind to create, to explore, to build something meaningful?" That shift, from shame to acceptance, from confusion to clarity, is the foundation of healing. Because the truth is, what once looked like chaos can, with awareness, become creativity. What once felt like a burden can become a power. And what once convinced you that you were broken can become the very reason you changed the world in your own quiet, brilliant way. At the end of it all, I want you to carry one truth with you: your mind isn't a curse, it's a rare design. For years, you may have carried the weight of believing you were flawed, lazy, distracted, or broken. But what if the very traits you thought were holding you back are the same ones that make you stand apart? What looks like restlessness is often the hunger for deeper meaning. What looks like perfectionism is the drive to bring clarity where others settle for confusion. And what looks like being different is the seed of originality, the thing that allows you to see the world in ways most people never will. This isn't about pretending the struggle isn't real. The struggle is very real. But struggle doesn't mean defect. Struggle means you are carrying a mind that demands more, that resists the ordinary, that seeks a higher order of truth. That resistance is not weakness, it's the mark of your potential. So instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" start asking, "What can this mind create that no one else can?" That single question turns shame into strength, isolation into purpose. And here's the part you must not forget: the world doesn't move forward because of people who fit in effortlessly. It moves forward because of people who couldn't. People whose inner wiring forced them to think differently, to challenge norms, to build what didn't exist before. You carry that same wiring. So if you've ever felt defective, let this be your reminder: what you thought was a weakness may be the very source of your originality, your brilliance, and your contribution to this world.